This tutorial is going to cover the basics of embroidering with your Cricut machine. Now, whether you have a pattern that is for yarn sewing or one that's for regular embroidery, this tutorial is going to cover the techniques for both. So it's okay if your pattern doesn't look exactly like mine, the stitches are going to be the same. Let's talk about the materials you'll need to get started. So you'll want to print off the sewing pattern onto a piece of cardstock or chipboard, or I have some faux suede here or leather. I feel like that works really well. Today I'm working with a heavy cardstock. So you can see here that I've used the pen to draw the pattern lines right onto the cardstock so I know exactly where to stitch. So I recommend using a color that's sort of similar to the piece of material you're using, just in case Cricut gets off by a little bit. It's okay if all the holes don't fall out of your material. As we're stitching, they'll kind of pop out, or you can pull them out along the way. So if you're working with kids' yarn sewing patterns, you'll just want to pick up a few different colors of yarn from Joann's or any other craft store. I really like Lion brand. And then we have some options for the needles. So because the holes are larger, we can use either size 18 or 13 tapestry or the 2.75 plastic needle. You could also just wrap tape around the end if you're in a pinch. If you're working with the adult embroidery patterns, I would recommend buying DMC floss. This comes in 6 strands, and the numbers I'm using today are 3777 and 986. So you can pick this up at just about any craft store. You'll also want number 5 needles. This is a pretty common size, so you should be able to pick it up at any craft store or even Walmart. Before you thread your needle, go ahead and wet the end of the floss with your mouth and kind of flatten it with your teeth. See how I made it pretty narrow there? So what we're going to want to focus on is bringing the needle to the thread. So don't worry if this takes a few tries. I've had a lot of practice and I promise it gets easier. So every single one of my patterns uses the back stitch, which is just the straight stitch on the lines. So the yarn embroidery actually only has back stitch. So this is the only stitch you'll need for these patterns. But then these, they'll have a back stitch here and then lazy daisy. And then the little berries are called colonial knots. So I'll be showing you how to do all 3 of those stitches, and then you'll be able to do any of the patterns in my shop. So for our first stitch, we're going to start on one of these straight line areas and come up from the back side of your material. So you always start from the back, and then we're going to go down through the next hole. So don't pull all the way through. The first thing we're going to do is just tie a knot. This will just secure the thread for the rest of our sewing, and I'm going to trim it here. So for the back stitch, we are going to come up through the next open hole. And then, because the name is backstitch, we're going to go back down through the previous. And we just follow that pattern. We're going to go up through the next open hole. It's harder to do on camera. And then we're going to go back down through the last hole. Again, we're going to go up through the next open hole. And then back down through the previous. So this is the back stitch. It is a pretty easy stitch. We're going to go up through the next open. You can kind of pick which one you want to do here. You can do them out of order. I mean, I don't recommend that, but you could. And then we're going to go back down through the previous. So that is pretty much all there is to the back stitch. Up through the next open hole, which is going to be this one. And then back down through the previous. All right, so why don't you go ahead and stitch until you've run out of thread, and I'm going to show you how to tie it off and reload. All right, I've come to just about the end of my thread here, and you can see the tail here is pretty short. This is about the length I'm comfortable ending with. So to do that, we're going to tie a knot on the back, and this is just called a tie off. So you're going to pick any of these threads to put your needle under and create this loop. So what you're going to do is bring your needle back through that loop, and we're going to repeat this step. So go under, create a loop, and go through that loop. So what that did right there was just to create a nice little knot. Now we can cut it and reload our needle. Now to get started with new thread, we just kind of repeat the process we did over here, which is to create your first stitch. So come up from the back, and leave some excess and then go back down. So we are going to go ahead and tie a knot right here, and we're ready to keep stitching. So if you have a yarn sewing pattern, you now have all the knowledge you need to get started. The backs are a little bit messy, but if you'd like, you could cut out another shape to glue on the back or even stitch to the back if it's the identical shape. Now, if you have an embroidery pattern that only has the back stitch, like these bones, you can also start sewing. No need to watch further. You have everything you need. For these ones, I have sewed the same shape to the back just so it's a little bit neater. You don't have to if you don't want to, but that is a good option for ornaments. Now, if you have an adult embroidery pattern that has little knots in it or some of these leaves, keep watching because I'm going to show you how to do those stitches next. All right, we are going to get started with the Lazy Daisy stitch. So the Lazy Daisy has a back stitch actually running through the stem, and then the leaves are what's called Lazy Daisy. So we're going to go ahead and start on this branch, and we're going to start with the back stitch. So we're going to go through that first large open hole, and we need to create our knot. So just go down and then tie a knot here. All right, so we're going to continue with the back stitch all the way through this stem. So it's really only 3 stitches here, and we've reached the end, and we're going to do our first Lazy Daisy. So to do this, we're going to come up through the end stem hole, and we're going to create a loop. So what I like to do is with one hand, with my thumb, I'm going to hold the thread while I go back down through that same hole. Now you don't want to pull the thread all the way through, which is why I hold it to create this loop. So I put the loop over this leaf, the end of the leaf, and I'm going to actually come up through that hole. If I can find it, there we go. All right, so I am coming up through this first leaf hole, and I'm going to pull not too tightly, but enough that it's kind of taut, but you could see that there's a leaf shape. So what I'm going to do with that same hand, I'm going to hold the leaf, and then I'm going to go back down on the outside of that thread through that same leaf end. So you don't want to pull super tight, but just enough that it's going to hold that leaf in place. So we're going to continue this through this next stem hole. We're going to come up here, and then I'm going to create a loop and kind of hold it with my thumb, go back down through that same hole, and then come up through this leaf. So you want to pull it tight-ish, hold it with your thumb, and go down on the outside of that loop. All right, so there is our second leaf. So we're going to come up through the same leaf stem hole again. All right, let's see here. Pull that through, and then we're going to create another loop. We're going to go down through that same hole, and then we're going to come up through the tip in the leaf and pull. Hold it with your thumb and go down on the outside of that loop. All right, that is the Lazy Daisy, and we're going to continue this down through the rest of this stem. Now we're ready to learn the colonial knot stitch. So this one starts a little bit differently because it is harder to get started. I like to tie off. So instead of doing that first stitch and then tying, we're going to just go under any one of the neighboring threads and make a little knot. All right, now that we have our knot on the back, we're going to come up through any one of those little trio of holes. All right, to make the knot, we're going to go under our thread. So I just looped it under and I'm holding with my pointer finger. Then with my other hand, I'm going to grab the thread and loop it over the needle and hold that with my pointer finger. Then I'm going to go down through my same hole while I'm holding it kind of taut with this hand. And I'm going to bring my needle through and kind of pull tight. So see how that is wrapped around the needle now? It's not too tight, but it is definitely doesn't have anything loose. So I'm just going to go ahead and kind of yank my needle through here. And that is going to create this cute little berry knot. So let's watch me do that again. So I'm going to come up through another little hole. And then I am going to go under the thread. So right there, I kind of pick it up and I hold it. And then with this hand, I loop it over it and hold it. And now I'm going to go back down through the same hole and watch as I kind of, let's make sure we're focusing here. I'm pulling the needle or the thread tightly around the needle. And then I'm going to do a little kind of jerking pull, not too hard, but it's kind of helpful to get it started, and pull it tight. So now we have our 2 little berries, and let's go ahead and do our third. So I found that third hole, and I'm going to come up and loop under to pick it up and hold it, and grab the thread and go over and hold it, and into the hole, pull kind of tight, and jerk it through. All right, so that is how you do these cute little colonial knots. Now to finish this piece, I would probably, because I think it's going to be an ornament, I would probably cut out a smaller circle. This is out of the faux suede, so I would probably match whatever material I'm using to cut it out to just glue on the back to hide all the messy stitches. Now, if you'd like to learn a few more stitches, I do have another Cricut tutorial on my YouTube that goes through how to do a stem stitch and then also a woven wheel. So those are the 2 other really common stitches that I use in all my patterns that are in my Etsy shop. If you want information on more patterns or just have any questions, feel free to reach out on Instagram. I'm bella.collective, and that's also the name of my Etsy store where I have a couple other patterns that are good for Cricut machines. Happy stitching!